A decade ago, the Des Hasler coached Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs finished with the minor premiership. Led by the Dally M winning fullback Ben Barber, the Dogs cruised into the grand final where they were eventually beaten by the premiers Melbourne Storm. Hasler's tenure was a relatively successful one. In his 6 seasons, they played finals 5 times, making the grand final twice and winning a minor premiership. But his final season was a bit of a sign of what was to come. They finished 11th in 2017, and since then they finished 12th, 15th and 16th. Right now they're only off the bottom of the ladder because the Tigers are more of a basket case. Now I could go into what has happened off the field over the years, and while it's definitely been a contributing factor, I'm more interested in some of their on-field issues. So here's what's happened in the last 5 years that has seen the Dogs go from the penthouse to the doghouse. While we're going to start in 2017, issues kind of start back in 2015. Trent Hodkinson, well, he leads them to a grand final in 2014. He plays Origin that year and in 2015, but then he's released by the Bulldogs. And that begins a slow rot in the spine. They'd lost Michael Ennis the year before, so within 2 seasons they'd lost 2 of their most experienced players at hooker and halfback, and both of them had previously played State of Origin. And they were replaced with kind of no one. Michael Leacher came into hooker, and that was because they'd released Damien Cook to Souths. Josh Reynolds and Moses Mbye were the halves in 2016 and 2017, which is kind of, you're playing 2 5/8s in the halves. Generally, that doesn't work. They still had a decent side in 2017. Their forward pack was pretty well stacked, and they probably should have done a lot better than they did. They obviously lacked some polish in the spine because of those players that left that I mentioned. Leacher offered very little from hooker in terms of incisiveness, and they had a steady but not brilliant fullback in Will Hopewadi, who throughout his career, apart from his debut season at Manly, has always kind of been just that. He'll occasionally have a slice of brilliance or something else to his game, but he's never really been that game breaker from fullback that both Parramatta and the Bulldogs hoped he would be. And they kind of tried to address a lot of this in 2018 when they went and recruited Kieran Foran, but they got the kind of broken down version of Kieran Foran. He didn't play a lot of football across his 3 years. When he did play, the Bulldogs were a lot more competitive and they won games, but his injury problems meant that they needed more than what Foran could offer them, and eventually Foran returned to Manly, and suddenly a lot of his injury problems were over. But they had a very poor salary cap, and that's been written about plenty, particularly with the Des Hasler years towards the end of his tenure. A lot of his heavily back-ended contracts, well, they turned around and bit the Bulldogs in the backside. They were paying overs for players that weren't performing or weren't even in first grade. And good spine players don't grow on trees, so unless you develop them, then you're going to be paying through the nose for it, and they're probably paying for that now with their recruitment of Reid Marnie. He, of course, was in the Bulldogs system, and they released him because they didn't want to pay about $1,500 to him. So he went to Parramatta, became one of the best hookers in the competition, and now they've had to pay several $100,000 more than if they had developed him themselves. So the fact that Dean Pay was coach at this point in time probably didn't help either. He wasn't a big name coach, he was a rookie, and he wasn't going to really attract the types of players that the Bulldogs needed. So they really bottomed out under him. They finished 15th in his final year when he was sacked and momentarily replaced by Steve George-Jarlis. And by that time, they had no recognised hooker, they had no recognised fullback, and they had no recognised halves. Brendan Wakeham, Lachlan Lewis, Kieran Foran and Jack Cogger all played in the halves in 2020. Will Hopewadi and Dallin Watene-Zelezniak swapped around at fullback a bit, and they started trying to manufacture Jeremy Marshall-King into hooker, despite the fact he came through grades as a half and has never really looked at home in the number 9 jersey, feeding the ball out from the middle of the field. He doesn't quite have the physical presence that a lot of hookers need, but he's also not that creative from there, and he doesn't provide the type of energy you also need from hooker. So then we get to the Trent Barrett era. Now, as to why Trent Barrett was so highly regarded when he took over as coach, who knows? He had a 40% winning record at Manly. They finished second last in his final season. And while he was never actually sacked, he was released from his contract with years remaining to be replaced by Des Hasler. So, in effect, he was. Then he tried to take credit for Manly's turnaround under Hasler in their first year. Since joining the Bulldogs, he's got a 14% win rate. And that's 4 wins from 29 games. He'd be giving Cumberland a run for their money from 1908. And a big issue across Barrett's tenure has been instability in their spine. For a supposedly attack-minded coach, they are one of the worst scoring teams in the competition's history in 2021. In fact, they went about 3 consecutive games without scoring a point. So let me now take you to Mike Meehl-Wood's article in The Raw last week about the Dogs and their struggles with their halfbacks. Now, Barrett obviously didn't quite answer this question the way that we were looking for, but it is a question to be asked about the involvement of Bulldogs halfbacks in their attack this season. So Meehl-Wood's question came about after the round 5 loss, and Kyle Flanagan, who was starting his first game at halfback for the Bulldogs this year, only touched the ball 23 times. And that puts him literally last among NRL halfbacks who have donned the number 7 this year. I mean, if you look at the top 10, they're all your usual suspects. Daly Cherry Evans with 66 touches, Nicho Hynes at 64, Shaun Johnson at 60, Jackson Hastings 58, Toby Sexton 57, Nathan Cleary 56, Mitchell Moses 51, Luke Brooks at 50, Sean O'Sullivan at 50, Chad Townsend at 48, Lachlan Ilias at 48. I mean, these are all halfbacks, apart from Jackson Hastings, although he kind of plays the role as a halfback whenever he gets in the halves there at the Tigers. I mean, even Averillo and Wakeham have touched the ball more on average than Kyle Flanagan has. And I get it, these are small sample sizes, but this is reflective of what it takes to be a halfback in the NRL. You need to have your hands on the ball a lot, and particularly for the elite halfbacks that are looking at rep and finals football, they have easily more than 50 touches per game. And from that list, you can also tell that all of the Dogs halfbacks that have played this year are well down the list in terms of touches per game. Averillo, well, he's ranked 18th, and Wakeham's ranked 19th. But on the flip side, Matt Burton, well, he's listed at 3rd for 5/8 for touches on the ball. And really, he's second because Luke Brooks is there because he's been named at 5'8 this week. But back to the Bulldogs. So Burton's listed at 3rd. He's really second for most touches. And Burton touches the ball 49 times a game, which is much more what you'd expect from your halfback to be doing. So the only problem is that Burton runs the ball like a 5'8. He's equal 6th for average runs per game, but he's 13th for general play passes. So he gets the ball on average 49 times a game. On 16 occasions he passes, on 7 times he runs, and he kicks the ball on average 11 times a game. So what does all this mean? Well, Burton is getting the ball like a halfback, but he's running a lot more than most halfbacks and passing a lot less. In fact, among halfbacks, he'd be ranked 22 from 25 for passes per game. So you have a halfback, whether it be Flanagan, Wakeham, or Averillo, getting the ball like a 5'8 should, and a 5'8 getting the ball like a halfback should. It's led to a fairly headless attack with little to no incisiveness from halfback or from hooker. There's no point of difference that's going to skitter the defence. I mean, Matt Duffy was almost irrelevant in their game in round 5, and to the point where he wasn't even pushing up in support, which is kind of his main thing. He's not going to beat a ton of players with strength or with exceeding ball playing ability or a short kicking game. His game is really about support play, and he wasn't even doing that for them. But the interesting thing here is when you actually look at Kyle Flanagan's involvement last year, it was more than double what it's been this year. He averaged 52 touches a game during his 13 matches last year before he was unceremoniously dumped to reserve grade and never seen again. I mean, if you're talking about how to mismanage a halfback, particularly a young one still learning his trade, that's how you do it. You bring him into first grade, tell him he's leading the team, and then when the team goes bad, instead of trying to support him and back him throughout the season and give him plenty of chances to develop his game, you drop him to reserve grade. And then when the next season starts, you leave him there until he, is one of the better halves in reserve grade. And then you bring him into first grade again and you hand him that sack of crap, which was, hey, kid, go play against Penrith and then play against Souths. Which I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing. Flanagan obviously wants to play first grade, but in saying that, you've kind of destroyed his confidence and then brought him into first grade hoping it's going to fix your problems, and your problems are a lot deeper than just that. Obviously, last year he was seen as the dominant half, and it kind of makes sense there was no Matt Burton. They had a very kind of choppy, changey 5'8 roster last year. But you can even go back to his time at the Roosters, and Flanagan seems to be a natural player at getting on the ball more. He still averaged 37 touches a game when he was playing for the Tricolours, and he was definitely not the dominant half there. That went to Luke Keary. But this all seems to have flipped this year. Possibly because so much has been handed to Burton. He's such a high-profile recruit. You can't kind of leave him out there on the edge catching a cold. And the left edge is Burton, Averillo and Josh Adokar, which is probably the Bulldogs' best attacking side, but it's also the side that most teams like to attack down. The left-hand side is a much more natural way to attack, but it still doesn't explain why Kyle Flanagan is not getting in at first receiver more and looking to get involved in the game. Players will naturally start to play, quite often they start to play better when they're getting their hands on the ball more and getting more involved because they feel more comfortable in running the side. Even Jake Averillo had more involvement last year. He averaged 43 touches a game across both 5'8" and halfback. So again, it was better than this year. And again, it comes back to the point that, well, Burton's in the side, so they seem to be trying to do everything around him without really understanding at the moment that Burton is more inclined to run the ball than he is to really organise like a halfback. This could quite possibly even out as the season goes on. If he leaves Flanagan in the number 7 for a while, Flanagan gets more used to playing first grade again and he gets comfortable with bossing his side around the park and getting into first receiver. But again, that's going to rely on Barrett sticking with him for more than 2 weeks before changing again. Now, I'm not necessarily here to bash the Bulldogs. That's a very easy thing to do, and as a Parramatta fan, I'm more than happy to do that. But them turning it around this season is going to rely on them actually having a halfback and not just a 5'8" with a booming boot who can run the ball. The Dogs can look forward to next season when they get Viliami Kikau and Reed Marnie. But in the words of Vince Lombardi, winning is a habit, and unfortunately, so is losing. So those 2 additions will only go so far if the Dogs actually work out how they want to play and utilise those guys. And really, that starts this season. They've got to identify how they want to play going forward and what type of identity they want to have as a football side, and not just as a group of blokes who run around on the weekend wearing the same jersey. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I will catch you guys next time.